The rain fell cold on Orion 4 as Serena told the child she was no longer welcome. Her father was dead and the colony had turned its back. Then a stranger stepped out of the shadows. An Earth engineer with documents that changed everything. He wasn't just there to comfort her. He was there to claim guardianship and to uncover the truth behind her father's death. The rain fell hard on Orion 4, a cold and calculated downpour from atmospheric processors. This wasn't natural weather. It was a manufactured gloom for a funeral nobody truly mourned. The lights above the landing pad cast sharp angles across soaked figures gathered in reluctant ceremony. Serena stood rigid beside the freshly sealed grave, her blue skin gleaming under the harsh luminescence. She did not look at the burial plaque bearing Kaelin Thor's name. Her gaze fixed on the small figure beside her, Liara, her stepdaughter, drenched and shaking. There was no grief in Serena's eyes, only cold assessment. She spoke the words clearly, cutting through the drumming rain. Your father is gone. You are no longer welcome here. The other colonists turned their faces away. They let the ceremonial water from the sprinklers splash over the child. A tradition from old Earth twisted into a gesture of abandonment. Each drop that hit Liara's shoulders was a public declaration. She was alone now. Security Chief Varric watched from the perimeter, a solid and unmoving silhouette. His hand rested on the handle of his stun baton, not as a threat but as a statement. He was there to ensure the colony's decision stood. To enforce the cutting of this last tie, his presence made it official, systemic. This exile was approved. Liara stood small in the downpour, her thin clothing plastered to her skin. She didn't cry. She just shivered, her world dissolving in the cold artificial rain. The people who were supposed to be her community, her protectors, had become a wall of turned backs and averted eyes. This moment was not a mistake. It was not an error made in the raw shock of grief. It was deliberate. A political move dressed in the clothes of tradition, severing a child from her home to tidy up a problem. The administration had already started wiping Kaelin Thor from their records. His research, his quarters, his presence, all were being systematically erased. His daughter was simply the next file to close, the last loose end from a man they had deemed inconvenient. They watched her stand there isolated and believed the matter was settled. The problem was contained. Then motion flickered at the very edge of the lit landing pad. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of a grounded cargo hauler. A figure stepped into the fringe of the harsh light, his earth-made coat dark and heavy with rain. Water streamed from the brim of his hat as he looked toward the gathering. He was 3 days late, but Manus Ray had finally arrived. Manus Ray moved with the weary grace of a man who understood machinery and its inevitable failures. His stride was measured, not hurried, with the solid posture of someone used to heavy tools and long repairs. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat and the hem of his coat. He ignored the gathered officials, their postures rigid and formal. His eyes went straight to the child, small, alone, shivering in the downpour. He stepped between Liara and Serena without hesitation. He became a barrier, a wall of damp fabric and quiet intent. His movement was not aggressive but definite. It shifted the energy on the landing pad completely. Serena's head snapped up. Her voice cut through the drumming rain, sharp with the authority of her position. Identify yourself. This is a private colony matter. The demand was a test, an attempt to reassert control over the scene she had so carefully staged. Manus did not raise his voice. He reached into his coat, his movements slow and deliberate. His fingers closed on a data slate. He pulled it out, the screen glowing to life in the gray half-light. The display showed 2 official seals from Earth Central, their holographic emblems rotating slowly above the surface. They pulsed with a soft, authoritative light. He held the slate so she could see it clearly. Kaelin Thor named me legal guardian, filed with both Earth and Proxima Centauri administrations. The paperwork is current, binding. His words were flat, factual. He offered no emotion, just the cold, hard reality of interstellar law. This changed the nature of the confrontation entirely. It was no longer about a grieving widow and an orphaned child. It was about jurisdiction, legal precedent. The data slate in his hand was not a request. It was a shield, a document that countered their local authority with the weight of 2 major governing bodies. Serena's composure fractured. A flicker of something, surprise then irritation, crossed her face. She had prepared for tears, for defiance, for a child's helplessness. She had not prepared for an Earth-based intervention. She had not calculated for a man with the right forms filed in the right offices. A man who arrived 3 days late with the one thing that could stop her plan cold. Manus's presence reframed Liara's entire existence in that moment. She was not a cast-off orphan, a problem to be removed. She was a ward, a minor under the protection of Earth law. She had a legal claim to her place here, and he was the instrument of that claim. He was the proof that her father had seen this coming, that he had made plans from beyond the grave to protect her. The artificial rain continued to fall, but the meaning of the ceremony had been utterly rewritten. Liara clutched a worn toy in her small hands. It was a 6-legged Orion creature her father carved from blue wood, its surface smoothed by years of handling. The shape fit perfectly in her palm, a familiar weight in a world that had suddenly turned cold and hostile. This carving was the only thing they had let her keep. It was her last physical connection to Kaelin Thor, a comfort object she held tightly as her new reality settled in. Manus led her away from the memorial site, his grip firm but not rough on her shoulder. He guided her through the colony's clean, bright corridors toward the temporary workshop assigned to him. The space was cluttered with tools and machine parts smelling of oil and ozone. It felt more real than the sterile hallways they had just left. He sat her on a crate and knelt so his eyes were level with hers. He spoke in low, steady tones, explaining that her father had trusted him, that he had made plans, that she was safe with him now. Liara listened, but her attention remained on the wooden creature in her hands. Her fingers moved over its grooves and contours, tracing the familiar paths her father's knife had carved. It was a habit, something she did when she was scared or thinking. The motion soothed her. The wood felt warm under her touch. Then a thin, almost invisible seam along the toy's belly began to glow. A soft blue light emanated from within, pulsing gently. Liara froze. Her fingers stilled. The light brightened, and a small section of the carving slid aside with a quiet click. A holographic emitter no larger than her thumb extended from the opening. It hummed softly, a flickering image projected into the air between them. It was Kaelin Thor. His face was sharp with urgency, his eyes wide with a fear Liara had never seen in him before. He wasn't looking at Manus. He was looking straight ahead, as if speaking directly to his daughter. His voice was hushed but clear, layered with a tension that filled the small workshop. Liara, be brave. His image wavered slightly. Manus, protect her. Trust no one in the colony administration. No one. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This was not a sentimental recording. It was a warning. A plea from beyond the grave. The message lasted only a few seconds before the hologram dissolved, and the light in the toy faded. The small workshop fell silent. The hum of machinery seemed louder now. Manus looked from the toy to Liara's frightened face. He understood immediately. This changed everything. His duty was no longer just about providing shelter or fulfilling a legal obligation. Kaelin's death had not been an accident. It was something else, something that required hidden messages and warnings whispered from inside a child's toy. The wooden creature was no longer just a comfort object. It was evidence, and Liara was now carrying it. Kaelin's hologram flickered in the dim light of the workshop. It was a ghost from a recent past, but its message warned of a terrible and immediate future. His face held a tension Liara had never seen in life. This was not the calm scientist she remembered. This was a man cornered by a truth too large to contain. He spoke again, his voice lower now, the words meant only for them. He revealed the reason for his death. He had uncovered illegal experiments, not minor violations, but deep systemic work the colony administration had buried. The research was not about understanding Orion 4. It was about controlling it, weaponizing it. Serena and Varric led the project. They were manipulating indigenous life forms, splicing genes, rewriting the biology of the planet itself. Kaelin's voice grew tight as he explained. It was a dread that seemed to choke him even in recording. The goal was not academic. It was military. The ultimate aim was weaponization. These are biological weapons, Kaelin said. The words hung in the workshop's air, heavy and toxic. They were not theories or suspicions. He had proof. He had collected data logs, sample sequences, and official communiques, verifiable evidence of the crimes. He had hidden it all to keep it from being erased, to keep it from being silenced along with him. The coordinates to this evidence were not spoken aloud in the message. They were encoded within the holographic signal itself, a digital signature woven into the light, a puzzle only the right person could unravel. The toy was not just a messenger, it was a key. Liara sat very still, the wooden creature heavy in her hands. She was not just a witness to her father's murder now, she was the carrier of the proof that could expose it. She held the reason he was killed. The knowledge made her small shoulders seem to bow under a new weight. Manus understood the gravity of it instantly. His mind, used to calculating stresses and tolerances, measured the danger in the room. Protecting Liara was no longer about providing shelter. It was about safeguarding the most dangerous truth on Orion 4. She was a living repository of evidence that could bring down the entire colonial administration. She was a target. The mission shifted in that moment. It was no longer about finding a home for a child. It was about stopping a conspiracy that threatened the entire biosphere. The experiments Kalen described were not contained. They were reckless. A single engineered organism released into the wild could unravel the planet's ecosystem. It could become a plague. This was bigger than one girl's exile. It was about preventing a catastrophe. Manus looked from the now dark toy to Liara's pale, determined face. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a spark of her father's stubbornness. The legal guardianship he carried was just a piece of paper now. His real duty was clear. He had to get her to that data. He had to help her finish what her father started. The quiet hum of the workshop felt like the calm before a storm. The workshop door shuddered. A heavy impact struck the metal plating from the outside. The sound was not a knock. It was a demand. Barrick's security team was there. Their voices, muffled but urgent, ordered them to open up. The time for talking was over. Manus knew it immediately. He had seconds, maybe a minute, before they decided to breach the door. His mind did not race. It focused. His eyes swept the cluttered workshop not for a way to reason, but for a way out. He looked past the spare parts and diagnostic equipment. He was not searching for a weapon. He was looking for tools. His hand closed on a plasma cutter. It was a heavy piece of construction gear, designed for slicing through metal plating and welding joints. He hefted its familiar weight. In his hands, it was no longer just a tool. It was about to become something else. He grabbed a length of spare pipe from a nearby rack. He worked fast. Sparks flew as he activated the cutter and welded the pipe to its housing in two rough, strong beads. The metal glowed orange, then cooled to a dull gray. The result was an improvised spear, long and unbalanced, with a humming, energized tip that could slice through armor. It was an ugly, practical weapon. He turned to Liara. He guided her toward a wall panel, a maintenance access point he had noted earlier. He jammed a crowbar into the seam and pried. The panel groaned, then gave way, revealing a dark, cramped shaft beyond. It was a tight space, just conduits and cables and dust. A high-pitched whine cut through the air. A security drone, no larger than a man's head, buzzed into the room through a ventilation grill. Its single red eye scanned, locking onto them. It aimed a stun emitter. Manus did not flinch. He did not shout. He simply swung the plasma spear. The movement was not graceful. It was a hard, horizontal chop. The energized tip connected with the drone's central chassis. The sound was a sharp crackle of discharging energy and shearing metal. A shower of white sparks erupted. The drone sparked, shuddered, and crashed to the floor in a tangle of broken parts. He didn't pause to look at the wreckage. He pushed Liara toward the open maintenance shaft. "Go now. Don't look back." His voice was low, a command, not a plea. She scrambled into the darkness, her small form disappearing into the narrow tunnel. Manus followed, pulling the access panel mostly shut behind him. The darkness was immediate and thick, smelling of ozone and old metal. The only light came from the faint glow of power conduits running along the walls. Their flight began not as a run, but as a crawl. They moved downward, deeper into the station's underbelly, a complex ecosystem of machinery that most colonists never saw. He led her through a series of turns, choosing junctions based on memory of station schematics and the logic of pipework. They passed service lights and junction boxes, their path a deliberate misdirection away from the main corridors. Each cramped passage and ladder descent was a move to buy time, to put layers of steel and circuitry between them and Varick's team. They were descending into the industrial heart of the station, where the air grew warmer and the hum of generators was a constant vibration in the metal around them. The maintenance shafts led them downward. The air grew colder, carrying the faint metallic scent of the station's outer hull. The constant vibration of life support systems gave way to the deeper, steadier hum of structural integrity fields. They were moving away from the inhabited sections into the skeletal framework that held the colony together. Alarms began to blare. The sound was distant at first, a muffled electronic wail filtering through ventilation grates and bulkheads. Then it grew louder, sharper. Red emergency lights flashed in the intersections of larger access corridors they glimpsed through service hatches. Varric had escalated the search. The quiet pursuit was over. This was now a full lockdown. Manus's goal was the emergency pod bay. It was a desperate plan. A long shot he knew was likely monitored and locked down the moment the alarms sounded. Security protocols would have sealed all primary escape routes. But he was not thinking like security. He was thinking like an engineer. He relied on his deep knowledge of station design, the kind learned from schematics and repair logs, not patrol routes. He took them through conduits meant for maintenance crews, through narrow passages that bypassed major corridors. These were arteries for repairs, not travel. Liara kept up, her small size an advantage in the tight, claustrophobic passages where he had to turn sideways. She moved without complaint, her breathing quick but controlled. Her hand stayed closed around the wooden toy in her pocket. They reached a final ladder, its rungs cold to the touch. He paused at the top, listening. The alarm was clearer here, more immediate. He gestured for her to wait, then descended. At the bottom, he unlatched a heavy hatch, its mechanism stiff from disuse. He pushed it open a crack. They burst out into a wide, cold corridor. The air was noticeably chillier here, near the vacuum of space. The corridor was lined with emergency pod hatches, each a rounded door set into the wall with a small viewport. The lighting was a dim, functional blue. Most of the hatches were sealed shut. A solid red light glowed ominously above each one, indicating a lockdown status. The entire bay was under security control. Manus scanned the row, his eyes moving fast. His hope was fading. Then he saw it. At the far end of the row, one pod showed a soft green ready light. Its hatch was not fully sealed. It stood slightly ajar, as if someone had recently performed a systems check and failed to secure it properly. It was a mistake, a tiny flaw in Varric's net. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed Liara's arm and moved. They ran down the length of the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The open pod was their only chance. He reached it, yanked the hatch fully open. The interior was cramped, just 2 seats and a minimal control panel. He shoved Liara inside onto the small passenger couch. She scrambled into the harness. He followed immediately, his larger frame crowding the tiny space. He pulled the heavy hatch shut behind him, spinning the manual lock until it sealed with a solid thunk. The outside alarms became a muffled drone. Inside, the pod was silent for a heartbeat. Then the systems came online with a soft rising hum. Control panels lit up, casting a pale glow on their faces. Screens displayed trajectory options and atmospheric readouts. The pod was live. It was responding. They had a chance, however slim, to break free of the station and reach the planet's surface below. The hum of the engines was a promise of distance, of a head start in the vastness of space. The pod broke through Orion 4's atmosphere. The exterior glowed orange with re-entry heat. The small craft shuddered violently, shaking them hard in their harnesses. Alarms blared inside the cramped compartment. Manus's hands flew over the controls, fighting the drag and turbulence. The planet's surface rushed up to meet them, a blur of blue and green. They crash-landed in a forest. The impact was harsh but not fatal. The pod slammed into the ground, then skidded, tilting sharply before jolting to a stop. Thick blue moss absorbed much of the force, cushioning the landing like a natural airbag. The hull groaned but held. Silence followed the violent noise. The pod's systems powered down with a series of quiet clicks. Manus unstrapped himself and checked Liara. She was shaken but unharmed. He popped the emergency hatch release. The door swung open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The air that flowed in was thick and strange. It carried the scent of alien flora, a mix of sweet nectar, sharp metal, and damp earth. It was heavy, almost wet, filling their lungs with the smell of a world utterly unlike Earth. They climbed out into the blue forest. Towering trees rose around them, their trunks thick and twisted. The leaves overhead were not green. They glowed with a soft internal blue light, casting an eerie, constant radiance across the landscape. The light shifted and pulsed faintly like a slow heartbeat. It made the entire forest feel alive and watchful. Shadows were deep in blue, not black. This was the southern continent. The coordinates from Kalen's message placed them here. It was a remote and largely uncharted region, far from the main colony's influence. The terrain was rugged, a wilderness the administration had not yet tamed or spoiled with its experiments. It felt ancient and untouched. Liara stood beside the wrecked pod and looked around. Her initial fear faded, replaced by a flicker of recognition. This was not a strange and hostile place to her. This was her father's world. Kalen had brought her here on research trips. He had taught her about this forest. She knew the shapes of these trees, the feeling of this moss underfoot. It was a landscape from her childhood, now rendered deadly serious. Her knowledge was no longer just memory. It became an essential tool. She knew the names her father had given the swirling patterns in the moss under their feet. She recognized the low, chittering calls coming from the undergrowth, identifying the creatures that made them without seeing them. She knew which plants were safe to touch and which were not. Her education shifted from theory to practice in an instant. Manus watched her. The engineer, who understood machines and structures, knew he was out of his element here. He did not understand this ecosystem. Its rules were written in a language he couldn't read. He saw the forest as a series of threats and obstacles. He looked to Liara for guidance. He followed her lead, his movements becoming more cautious, more observant. He learned from her quiet confidence. Their goal was a cave system. Kalen's hidden message had pointed them here for a reason. He believed this specific region held Orion's deepest secrets. The entrance was somewhere in this glowing forest, a natural vault where he had hidden the proof of the administration's crimes. They needed to find it before Varric's teams could track them down. The blue light of the forest was their cover, but also their challenge. They moved away from the crashed pod, leaving it behind as a marker. Liara led the way, her small form navigating the familiar yet dangerous terrain with a purpose that belied her age. She was taking them home to the last place her father had trusted. The blue moss beneath their feet began to ripple. The patterns were not random. They shifted in complex waves, a silent language written on the ground. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. The usual chorus of clicks and hums from the undergrowth fell silent. The air grew still. Liara froze. Her hand snapped up, fingers spread in a sharp, silent warning to Manus. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the shifting ground. She identified the threat before he could even process the change. Her voice was a tight whisper. Ridge stalkers, then they emerged. They came from the deep shadows between the glowing trees, their bodies low and fluid against the blue moss. They moved with a silent coordination that spoke of a shared mind. A pack. Their hides were a mottled gray-blue, perfect camouflage in the shifting light. Dozens of eyes caught the forest's glow, shining like chips of cold glass. Their jaws were long and lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth. Saliva dripped from them, sizzling faintly where it hit the moss. They fanned out a half-circle of silent, lethal intent. Their movements were economical, without a single wasted motion. They were closing the distance, a noose tightening around the two intruders. Manus reacted on instinct. He raised the plasma spear, its tip humming to life with a surge of blue energy. He planted his feet, ready to meet the charge. He calculated the odds instantly. They were bad. The pack had numbers, strength, and home ground advantage. His mind raced through angles of attack, points of defense. It would be a brutal short fight, a losing battle. Liara's hand shot out and gripped his arm. Her touch was surprisingly strong. No, she said, her voice low and urgent. Don't fight. You cannot win that way. Her eyes were locked on the advancing stalkers, but her words were for him. She explained quickly, the lessons from her father surfacing under the pressure. This was not about winning with force. It was about winning with display. Her father had taught her this. Ridge stalkers were communal hunters. They respected strength, but not the kind from a weapon. They understood posturing, a show of dominance, a challenge. The strategy was to stand your ground, to look bigger, to look more dangerous than you were, to show them that attacking would cost them dearly. Manus held his position, the spear still ready, but his stance shifting. He trusted her. He watched her. Liara took a single step forward, placing herself slightly ahead of him. She did not cower. She straightened her shoulders. She filled her lungs. Then she let out a sound. It was a sharp guttural cry that ripped through the silent forest. It was not a human sound. It was a ridge stalker's own warning call, a challenge cry she had learned from Kalen. He had spent years recording them, understanding their language. Now she gave it back to them. The effect was immediate. The pack froze. Their coordinated advance shattered. The lead stalker, a larger male with a scar across its muzzle, stopped its low crawl. Dozens of glassy eyes fixed on the small figure that had just issued a challenge in their own tongue. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with tension. The only sound was the faint sizzle of drool and the hum of the plasma spear. The lead stalker tilted its head. It seemed to assess her. It looked from her small form to the man with the weapon behind her. The moment hung in the balance. Then, without a sound, it took a step back. Another followed. The pack's formation broke. They did not run. They simply melted backward into the undergrowth, their gray-blue forms disappearing between the trees as quietly as they had arrived. They were gone. The forest's normal sounds slowly returned. The display had been respected. The threat was over. The cave entrance was a narrow fissure in a rock face. Thick, glowing vines hung over it, their light a soft curtain hiding the opening from casual view. The rock was dark and wet, water beating on its surface from the damp forest air. It did not look like a place of importance. It looked like a crack in the world. Inside, the world changed. The air turned cool and carried the heavy smell of mineral damp, like wet stone and deep earth. The sounds of the forest vanished, replaced by the slow, steady drip of water from above. The space was not large at first, a tight passage that forced them to move single file. The ground underfoot was smooth, worn down by time or water or something else. Bioluminescent organisms covered the ceiling. They were not like the forest's leaves. These were clusters of tiny, soft lights, each one a pinprick of blue or green. They formed patterns that looked like star maps, constellations of gentle light in the deep dark. The light was not bright. It was just enough to see by, casting long, soft shadows that moved as they did. It felt like walking under a night sky turned inside out. They moved deeper. The passage twisted and turned, branching sometimes, but Liara led them with a quiet certainty. She followed the coordinates from her father's message, a mental map only she could read in the cave's labyrinth. The twists felt intentional, like a path designed to confuse anyone who did not know the way. The walls were close, sometimes brushing their shoulders. The air remained cool and still. The cave felt ancient. It was a silence that had existed long before the first colonists set foot on Orion 4. It was a witness to millennia, holding secrets in its stone. The smoothness of the floor, the patterns on the walls, they spoke of time on a scale humans struggled to grasp. This place was old when Kalen found it. It would be old long after they were gone. They entered a central chamber. The space opened up suddenly, the ceiling rising high above them into darkness. The bioluminescent growths were sparse here, leaving pools of deep shadow around the edges. In the center of the chamber stood a single column of rock. It rose from the floor to the ceiling, smooth and almost perfectly round. It looked out of place, too regular to be natural. It dominated the room. Set into the surface of the column was a device. It was a flat, dark panel with a hand-shaped indentation, a biometric lock. It waited for a specific DNA signature. There were no buttons, no screens, just that smooth, palm-sized depression in the stone. It was a silent sentinel, guarding whatever lay within. Kalen had left his evidence here. He had chosen this deep, secret place to hide the truth. He protected it with a lock that only he or his daughter could open. It was a final, profound act of trust. He had built a vault that could not be forced, that could not be hacked. It required a key that was part of her very being. His faith was not in systems or security. It was in his child. He believed she would survive. He believed she would come here. He believed she would finish what he started. The bond between parent and child was the literal key to unlocking the conspiracy. It was not a metaphor. It was a biological fact. Her hand, her genetic code was the only thing that could open this door. The administration with all its power, Varric with all his weapons, could not breach this security. It was designed against them. It was designed for her. She stood before the column looking at the place for her hand. The weight of her father's trust settled on her small shoulders. This was why he sent Manus. This was why she had to be brave. The answer was here, locked behind a father's love and a daughter's duty. The sound of boots echoed through the cave. It started as a faint rhythmic thud, then grew louder, sharper. The noise bounced off the stone walls, coming from multiple directions. Varric's security team was close. They had found the entrance. They were moving fast, their steps organized and purposeful. They knew where to look. The chamber was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap about to close. Manus moved without hesitation. He positioned himself at the mouth of the passage they had entered through. It was the only approach wide enough for a person. He planted his feet, his body angled to present a smaller target. His hands tightened on the plasma spear. The weapon hummed softly, its blue energy casting sharp shadows on the cave wall. He did not look back at Liara. His entire focus was on the tunnel ahead, on the sounds of approaching men. His job was to hold the line. To buy her time, every second counted now. Liara approached the smooth rock column. Her steps were slow but steady. Her small hand was outstretched, fingers slightly spread. The biometric lock waited, a dark indentation in the stone. The air in the chamber felt colder suddenly. The soft blue light from the ceiling seemed to dim, as if the cave itself was holding its breath. This was the moment her father had prepared for. This was why they had come. She placed her palm flat against the cold surface of the lock. The stone felt smooth and strangely alive under her touch. For a second, nothing happened. Then the device began to glow. A soft blue light emanated from the edges of the indentation, spreading outward. It was scanning her, reading the unique patterns of her DNA, the biological signature only she and her father shared. The light pulsed gently, rhythmically. It was a silent conversation between the machine and her blood. A soft, clear chime echoed through the chamber. The sound was clean and precise, cutting through the distant echo of boots. It was a sound of recognition, of acceptance. The rock face in front of her shifted. A nearly invisible seam appeared, and a small compartment no larger than her fist slid silently open. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a single data crystal. It pulsed with a soft internal light. The crystal was perfectly clear about the length of her thumb. Deep within its core, light swirled in complex patterns like a captured galaxy. This was it. Kalen's full evidence dossier. Everything he had died to protect. All the logs, the genetic sequences, the communiques. The entire damning truth about the administration's crimes was contained in that small glowing object. It was the weight of a father's sacrifice crystallized. The moment transformed their entire journey. They were no longer just two people fleeing for their lives. They were now carriers of justice. They held the proof that could shatter a conspiracy and save a world. The crystal was not just data. It was a verdict. Liara reached into the compartment. Her fingers closed around the crystal. It was cool and smooth. Its physical weight was almost nothing. But the burden it represented was immense. It was the reason her father was dead. It was the reason they were being hunted. It was everything. The proof was finally in their hands. They had what they came for. But the hardest part was just beginning. They had to get it off the planet. They had to get it to someone who could use it. Someone beyond Varric's reach. The crystal was useless here in this deep cave with armed men closing in. It needed to travel. It needed to be heard. The distant echo of boots grew louder, more distinct. They were out of time. The crystal was safe. They were not. Varric's men flooded into the chamber. They moved with practiced coordination, spreading out to block the only exit. Stun batons crackled in their hands, casting sharp blue-white light across the stone walls. 2 security drones hovered overhead, their red targeting lasers painting circles on Manus's chest. The air filled with the low hum of charged weapons and the scuff of heavy boots on rock. They were trapped. Their backs were to the smooth stone column, the open compartment still visible behind them. There was nowhere left to run. Varric stepped forward from the line of his men. His face was set in a mask of cold colonial authority. He did not look at Liara. His eyes were fixed on Manus, assessing the man with the improvised spear. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a tool for giving orders. The data crystal. Hand it over, now. He framed it not as a request, but as the enforcement of order, the protection of the colony. He called Kalen's evidence dangerous lies, a fiction that threatened their stability. He spoke of containment, of preventing panic. His words were meant to justify the violence he was about to unleash. Manus refused. His voice was low, but it carried through the chamber with a firmness that surprised even him. He did not shout. He spoke of a higher law, an ethical duty that went beyond colonial command, beyond local regulations. He talked about truth, about the responsibility to prevent a greater harm. He stood his ground, the plasma spear held ready. The confrontation was no longer about a physical fight. It was about two opposing ideas. On one side, the weight of institutional power, of rules written to protect a system. On the other, the stubborn courage of an individual who chose to protect a principle. Varric's patience broke. He gave a sharp nod to his men. The order was silent. The security officers advanced. Their movements were efficient, their expressions blank. They were doing a job. Manus met them. He fought not with skill, but with a raw, desperate energy. He was a man protecting a child. He was defending a future. He deflected stun blows with the shaft of his spear, the impacts vibrating up his arms. The humming tip of the weapon kept them at a distance, a barrier of contained energy. He was outnumbered. He was losing ground with every second. In a pivotal turn, Liara did not cower behind him. She saw Varric, confident and unmoving, directing the attack. She did not scream. She did not freeze. Her small hand closed around a loose chunk of rock on the cave floor. She moved quickly before thought could stop her. She darted forward and swung the rock hard into the side of Varric's knee. The impact was solid. A grunt of pain and surprise escaped him. His leg buckled. His perfect stance broke. His mask of control slipped, replaced by a flash of raw anger and shock. The moment of disorientation was tiny, a second, maybe two, but it was all Manus needed. His engineer's eyes, constantly scanning even in a fight, had already found what others missed, a narrow fissure in the rock behind the column, shadowed and almost invisible. As Varric stumbled, Manus disengaged from the advancing guards. He grabbed Liara's arm. He pulled her backward away from the fight into the narrow crack in the stone. It was a tight fit. He shoved her through first, then forced his own body after her into the darkness. The shouts of the security team echoed behind them, cut off as the passage narrowed and twisted. They were in another tunnel, unseen and unknown to their pursuers. The confrontation was over. The escape had begun again. The hidden passage led them out into the rocky foothills. The air was cleaner here, sharp and cold, smelling of stone and distant rain. The cave system was behind them, its secrets and dangers sealed in the dark. They stood on a slope of gray rock, looking out at a landscape of jagged peaks and deep valleys. The colony felt far away, but its reach was long. They were exposed. The twin suns of Orion 4 were beginning to set, casting long, deep shadows that stretched across the terrain. They needed cover. They needed a new plan. Getting the data crystal off-world was the only objective now. Staying on the planet meant eventual capture. The crystal was a beacon, drawing Varric's hunters to them. Manus accessed a secure channel on his personal comm. The device was a low-power, hard-to-track unit, not colony issue. He scrolled through the logs Kalen had shared, looking for a specific name. Professor Navari. Kalen had mentioned her as an ally, a fellow scientist who shared his concerns about the administration's direction. She was a xenobiologist. She had been Liara's mentor before Serena restricted her access. Kalen's notes marked her as a trusted contact, the last hope on a long list of compromised names. He sent a brief, encrypted burst, a request for aid, a statement of their situation. He did not expect an immediate reply. He expected silence, or worse, a trap. The response came back almost instantly. The message was clean and direct. It contained coordinates and a single instruction. Come, be quick. It was her. Professor Navari. She was listening. She was willing to risk everything. The coordinates led them to a remote homestead, a solid structure built into the side of a mountain, far from any colony transport routes. The building was low and sturdy, made of local stone and reinforced composite. It looked like part of the landscape. A small greenhouse dome attached to one side glowed with the soft light of cultivated plants. They approached cautiously. The door slid open before they reached it. Professor Navari stood in the doorway. She was an older woman, her face lined with experience, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She did not look surprised to see them. She looked prepared. Her eyes found Liara first. A wave of relief and sorrow passed over her features. She knelt and opened her arms. Liara hesitated for only a second before running into them. It was the first familiar, safe embrace she had felt since her father died. Navari held her tightly, a solid anchor in a world that had turned hostile. She was a known face, a voice from a better time. She looked up at Manus, taking in his weary posture, the improvised weapon in his hand, the determined set of his jaw. She saw the data crystal held securely in Liara's grip. She understood the stakes without needing it explained. Her expression was grim but resolved. She had made her choice the moment she received his message. She ushered them inside. Her home was a sanctuary. The main room was a working lab and living space combined. Specimen jars lined shelves filled with preserved Orion plant life and strange minerals. Data slates and research notes were stacked neatly on a central table. The air smelled of soil and ozone. It was a place of knowledge, a world away from the sterile authority of the main colony. She sat Liara down at the table and gave her a cup of something warm. She looked at the girl, really looked at her, seeing the fear in the hardening resolve. Her voice was soft but firm. "Home is not always a place, little one." She gestured around the room, then to Manus, and finally placed a hand on her own chest. "Sometimes it's the people who care for you." The words landed quietly in the warm room. Liara looked from Navari's kind face to Manus's weary, protective stance. She looked down at the data crystal, her father's last trust. She began to understand something new. Family did not have to be a bloodline or a legal document. It could be a choice. It could be forged in danger and sealed with trust. It was the people who stood with you when the world turned its back. The weight on her shoulders felt different suddenly. It was not lighter, but it was shared. Navari laid out the plan across her worn wooden table. It was a desperate gamble, the only one she had. They needed to reach the Northern Polar Research Station. The place was remote, a dome of science and isolation built on a continent of ice. It was cold there, a deep and constant chill that seeped into everything. The station was not a military outpost. It was a science facility. Its primary function was atmospheric research, and that was their only chance. The station housed a shuttle bay. The vessels there were not for long-haul travel. They were small, agile craft designed to punch into the upper atmosphere, take readings, and return. They were built for data, not for escape. But Navari claimed they could be modified. She knew the systems. She had friends there, allies who shared her distrust of the administration. With the right overrides, a research shuttle's engines could be pushed. Its trajectory could be spoofed. It could be made to break orbit, not just sample it. The shuttles had built-in stealth capabilities, a feature for studying weather patterns without being seen. That same tech could hide them from colony sensors. It was their one shot at getting the crystal off-world. The plan was high risk. It was a chain of fragile possibilities. It required flawless timing, stolen access codes, and a complete bypass of security protocols. One mistake would mean a swift and final end. They would be shot out of the sky long before they reached the trade routes. As if on cue, a figure appeared at the homestead's door. A man named Sarth entered without knocking. He was a native Orion guide, his face toughened by wind and cold. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew the land better than any colonist. He nodded to Navari, a silent acknowledgement of their shared cause. He corroborated her plan. He knew it was their only option. Sarth offered the missing piece. He knew a route north, not the main transport lines which would be watched. He knew a specialized cargo path, a series of underground mag rail lines and service tunnels that carried vital supplies to the polar station. Food, medical supplies, scientific equipment. The route was old, seldom used for personnel and largely forgotten by security. It was a concealed artery running through the planet's crust. It could avoid Varric's main security net entirely. It offered a hidden passage to the pole. Manus faced the choice. He could try to reason with the colonial system, to trust in a bureaucracy that had already proven corrupt. Or he could gamble on the allies Kalen Thor had chosen in secret. He looked at Liara sitting quietly, the data crystal held tightly in her small hand. He looked at the proof of her father's murder, swirling within that sliver of light. The evidence itself demanded the risk. It was too important to trust to a compromised system. Kalen had not trusted them. He had trusted Navari. He had trusted Sarth. He had trusted Manus. The decision was made. They would take the cargo route. They would travel through the dark, cold underbelly of the planet to reach the polar station. They would place their lives in the hands of a scientist and a guide. And then they would bet everything on the slim chance of stealing a shuttle and punching a hole through the sky. It was a long shot. It was a desperate move. but it was the only move left on the board. They would take it. The polar station was a dome of metal and composite under a sky of swirling ice. Wind whipped fine crystalline snow against the exterior, a constant low hiss that permeated the structure. The air inside was cold and dry, smelling of recycled oxygen and machine oil. It was a place of stark functionality, built for survival in a harsh environment, not for comfort. Sarth met them at a prearranged point near the main cargo airlock. He was waiting for them in the shadow of a large heat exchanger, his form almost invisible against the industrial machinery. He gave a short, sharp nod. It was the confirmation they needed. Navari's message had gotten through. The network of trust was holding for now. His face was grim, his eyes constantly scanning the wide corridor behind them. He had arranged their access. Using his credentials as a licensed guide for polar expeditions, he had logged them in as a contracted survey team. It was a thin cover, but it was enough to get them through the initial checkpoints. Their names were now in the system with a low-priority work order attached. They would blend into the station's normal daily flow. 2 more bodies in insulated gear moving through the hangar bay. It was a temporary illusion of belonging. The station was on high alert. Security bulletins from Varric's office glowed on every public screen. Their images were there, clear and sharp. Manus, Liara, wanted for questioning regarding colonial security matters. The notices were everywhere. A silent alarm that turned every glance from a stranger into a potential threat. The words "armed and dangerous" were printed in bold red type under their pictures. The air itself felt tense, charged with a quiet paranoia. Their timing had to be perfect. The escape plan relied on a precise sequence of digital sabotage. A colleague of Navari's, a technician at the station, was set to create a critical distraction. At the designated moment, they would initiate a decoupling of the flight control data stream. They would feed a false cascading systems malfunction into the network. The goal was to create a narrow window of confusion, a 5-minute period where sensor readings would be unreliable and comms would be flooded with error reports. It was their only chance to move unseen. The shuttle was a small atmospheric research vessel designated ARV-7. It sat in its berth, a sleek craft with swept-back wings and powerful-looking engines. It was currently being prepped not for science but for an unsanctioned voyage. The technician was already there, working under the guise of a standard systems diagnostic. Panels were open. Wires were exposed. The craft was being rewired for a one-way trip out of the atmosphere. The plan for Liara was specific and dangerous. She was too small, too identifiable. She could not be seen walking to the shuttle. They would hide her. The research vessel had a specialized storage compartment used for sensitive equipment. A small space shielded against most scans. It was cramped and cold with minimal oxygen, but it was their best option to get her past the final visual inspections. She would be concealed there until they were clear of the bay. They moved through the hangar. It was a vast echoing space filled with the sounds of machinery and distant voices. They walked with purpose, trying to mimic the bored efficiency of station workers. Manus kept his head down, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. Every uniformed guard standing post near the blast doors was a potential endpoint. Every security camera mounted on the high gantries was a watching eye. Their cover was a fragile thing, a story that could collapse under a single question. A moment of eye contact held too long. Each step was a calculated risk, a silent prayer that the distraction would come in time. The shuttle waited at the far end of the bay, its hatch open, looking like freedom and a death sentence in equal measure. They boarded the shuttle. The crew was already at their stations, a trio of Navari's contacts who had chosen this risk. The pilot was a woman with steady hands who had flown survey missions with Kalen years before. She gave a curt nod to Manus, her eyes holding a shared understanding of the stakes. The navigator was an older man, his face lined with experience, his movements deliberate and wary as he scanned the console. The technician was young, fingers tapping nervously across his screen, his energy a live wire in the cramped cockpit. They were not soldiers. They were scientists and engineers. This was not their normal work. They formed a fragile, improvised alliance. The bond was not friendship or loyalty to a cause. It was a shared deep respect for Kalen Thor, and a well-earned distrust of Varric and the administration he represented. They knew what was at stake. They knew the data Crystal Liara carried was worth more than their careers. It was worth their lives. The atmosphere in the shuttle was thick with unspoken fear and a grim determination to see this through. The launch sequence began. It was a tense ballet of authorized codes and sudden, unauthorized overrides. The navigator fed legitimate clearance signals to the bay control system, while the technician worked furiously in the background, slicing through security protocols with programs Navari had provided. Every second stretched. Every green light on the console felt like a minor victory. Every moment of silence from Station Command felt like a reprieve. They used a research tool as a weapon. The shuttle was equipped with an atmospheric dispersal unit designed to release sensor-reflective particles for weather testing. They triggered it inside the hangar bay. The system released a dense cloud of metallic chaff, a glittering fog that swirled around the craft. On the colony sensor scopes, the shuttle's signature fractured. It appeared as a dozen false readings, a cluster of ghost signals scattering in every direction. It was a magician's trick performed with scientific precision. Colonial security vessels scrambled. Their engines flared to life on the main orbital patrol screens, but they were confused. The sensor scramble worked. They did not chase one ship. They chased multiple false leads, diverting to investigate phantom contacts that flickered and died on their scopes. The deception bought them crucial time. Not much, maybe 10 minutes of confusion, but in space, 10 minutes was a lifetime. The shuttle accelerated. The pilot pushed the modified engines far beyond their recommended tolerances. The craft shuddered, the vibration a deep groan through the frame. The force pushed them back into their seats. The sky outside the viewport shifted from the deep blue of upper atmosphere to the hard black of space. The stars stopped twinkling and became fixed, sharp points of light. They were breaking the planet's grip. Orion 4 shrank behind them. It became a blue and white marble hanging in the void. A beautiful world hiding an ugly secret. The ice caps gleamed. The storm system swirled. It was the only home Liara had ever known, receding into the distance. There was no time to look back. They were not safe yet. Orbital security was still between them and freedom. Patrol cruisers lurked at the system's edge, guarding the jump points and trade routes. Their stolen shuttle was fast, but it was not a warship. It had no weapons. Its only defense was its small size and its spoofed signature. They needed to reach the perimeter of the main Earth trade route. They needed to hit a specific buoy, a communications relay that sat outside normal patrol patterns. They needed to broadcast the crystal's data burst on a secure channel, and hope someone on the other end was listening. Hope that Kalen's trust reached beyond the grave and beyond this system. The void ahead was vast and silent, holding their fate.